Hello everybody, welcome back to our Empaths series here, concepts for energetically sensitives and empaths. My name is Jona Brindis and I'm a professional energy healer and energy coach. And I'm going to introduce to you in a structured way what some of these concepts are that we are in need of understanding a little better, to contextualize better what is going on when we talk about energetic sensitivity. Today I want to cover the topic adverse childhood experiences and how it comes that so many of us energetically sensitives and empaths are suffering from a massive trauma load. How come that so many of us experience all these really traumatic things so early in our lives that we are forced to resort to our energetic sensitivity? I want to shed some light into this, and what I'm going to cover here is how we are being set up for certain things. We are being set up, of course, through some of the karmic stuff that we bring in, and that comes in through our family karma, that comes in through the need for our personal evolution here as a true self on this 3D plane in this lifetime. And how does all this happen? It happens through, this early conditioning, this early programming, and the early exposure that we have. So if you will, and I know this is a kind of unique way of looking at it, but if you will, the best way for our karma to come through and teach us the lessons that we need to learn in order to undo our trauma, to let go of our trauma, is to have all these adverse childhood experiences so that we can go through this and fast forward. So let me cover some of these most common ACEs, as they are called in the psychological and medical community, and what this means to you when you find that you have a lot of these early childhood or adverse childhood experiences. So if you want to know what sets you up for specific physical pains, for specific experiences, sometimes even for mental illnesses, then at least the medical and the psychological professionals will look at your early childhood exposure. Okay, and there are some factors here, 10 factors that are typically counted as factors influencing sort of your propensity to come up with specific diseases or illnesses. But also, decision making, whether you might be a risk taker, whether you might develop criminal tendencies, even, all the way to like sociopath and psychopathic or neurotic behavior. Okay, so the higher the score of your childhood trauma, the stronger the impact on your neurotransmitters and your physiology. And why is that? Because every time we experience trauma, our autonomous nervous system responds to it, without us being aware of it, in this fight, flight, freeze, or submit type of way. But for the most part, what it does to us is it predispositions our physical to go into certain places. And there's something like personality, of course, where some of us are more on the aggressive, on the extrovert side, and some of us are more on the submissive, on the introvert side. Okay, so some of that can also be mixed. But the main point being here that the stronger the impact on your neurology, the stronger the impact on your immune system, on even your genetic expression. Okay, you all know that, just because you have the gene for something doesn't mean that it has to come to an expression in this lifetime. But this is where karma kind of replicates. That is through our DNA. And many of you know this when we do energetic tune-ups and when we do energetic, especially the collective clearings, I work with your mitochondrial DNA because that's where your trauma is stored. Okay. Now, what does it affect? It affects, of course, how you experience your life, how you contextualize things that happen in your life, how you see yourself in this. And it can go all the way to your life expectancy and also how you deal with changes altogether. So some of the collective things that we're seeing here is due to these shifts and changes that happen in our societies, is that we have a higher tendency right now to ADHD. We have a higher tendency towards narcissism. We have a higher tendency towards bipolarism, where people have these like really extreme mood swings, such as borderline stuff, where it's very, very difficult for them to regulate themselves. And this plays directly into this global awakening with all these energetically sensitives and empaths now also showing up in increased numbers, which is sort of the overall intensity level of our perception is increasing. And this is why we need to look at some of these adverse circumstances of our childhood and how they impacted us, because they contribute to the toxic stress that we are absorbing on a day-to-day level. And many of you already know this, that when you are in a really bad place energetically, it's really difficult for you to respond to changes or challenges in your life in a positive way. It's very difficult, to stay optimistic, for instance, or it can be very challenging for you to deal with simple things in life, such as, your job or your children and so forth. So the main thing here to understand is that the reason why we need to look into our childhood and childhood trauma is not because of the content of it, the actual stuff that happened, is because of the composition that we have attracted here in our lifetime, because all these individual factors compound. They compound into what we call your trauma load, and what you could, in common language, express as your shit magnets. Okay, this is where your energy system is most susceptible to get affected, to absorb, and also to develop behaviors that actually make it worse, rather than help you to deal with this. Okay, so let's look at some of these factors here. There's 10 factors that are defined by the CDC, and then there is one extra factor that I want to add here for us energetically sensitives and empaths. One general aspect is, of course, the exposure to any type of visual, any type of experience, any type of extreme and intense energy in your life. That is a general aspect of adverse childhood exposure, simply because, especially before the age of 5, where your brain finally develops the ability to contextualize things and to see things as a concept, to say, oh, this is only a dream, oh, this is only a movie, and so forth. Until then, all this gets stored without filter. Okay, so everything that you've seen on TV, the shows, the video games, what other people say, what other people talk about, even if it doesn't affect you, that you've heard and seen before the age of 5, is stored in you. And your subconscious does not know that it's not you, or that it's not about you, so it takes that as your own. That's a big one, guys, a big one to understand, especially if you have children. Okay, factor number 1, as your ACE score, is if you've been exposed to a lot of swearing, insulting, humiliating, threatening around you. Okay, so basically, if there were people around you that used a really sort of violent language, verbal abuse can play into this. Even for an energetically sensitive, being shunned for the things that you see, that you feel, or how you see them. Factor number 2, you have been pushed around, you have been grabbed, you've been physically threatened, okay? Or you've been observing other people being pushed, being grabbed a lot when you were a child. All of these ACE, these adverse childhood experiences, count for the time from 0 till 18. Number 3, you've been exposed or participated in inappropriate sexual behavior. Now, for most of us, this is more of a forced exposure, and this can even mean like you've watched porn or inappropriate sexual scenes on TV when you were little, but also fondling. And of course, this whole big cluster of sexual trauma counts here too, this factor number 3. Factor number 4, you had extreme feelings of separation growing up, loneliness, where you felt nobody loves you, nobody understands you, you're not important, you have no significance, you have nothing that you can contribute. ACE factor number 5, you weren't really taught or modeled good self-care. You don't really know what it means to take good care of yourself. Often actually, all the way to not even learning that you have to brush your teeth every day, that you have to have, personal hygiene, but also, to eat right, and what it means to grow up in a sheltered, clean environment, where there's, where there's a lot of dirt, a lot of clutter, and where you don't really feel safe, where you don't really feel protected. ACE factor number 6 is when your parents were too checked out to be there for you, when there was like negligence or even abandonment, when they weren't really able to do the basics for you. And it's often also in conjunction, of course, with substance. So substance abuse then is the factor number 7. If you've been exposed to people who take drugs or alcohol or even medication, and this is part of your life growing up, that counts as an adverse childhood exposure. Number 8, if you went through divorce or separation growing up, even a very traumatic loss of, like, say, your best friend, or your grandparents dying, that's all sort of part of the natural circle of life if it happens, due to age. But if there are things that happen, such as your neighbor gets shot or your best friend gets killed in an accident, those are severe adverse childhood experiences. Number 9, if you went through a phase of depression and perhaps even suicidal thoughts, if you were surrounded by people who are very depressed or suicidal. And guys, this actually also counts the parent, that was perhaps mentally ill, or that had to deal with lots of ups and downs that you had to witness as a child, where you perhaps had to start taking care of your parent because they weren't able to function due to that. And number 10 is if you've observed any type of criminal activity, incarceration, if you had a parent in prison, for instance, if this was part of your life growing up, then you have adverse childhood experiences, and with it an increased trauma load, which can then lead to massive physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and energetic setups, and problems. And number 11, that's a special one here for empaths and energetically sensitives. And that has to do with narcissistic parenting. That has to do with, the seeing the child as the extension of the parent. The parent sees the child as the extension of him or herself, or of that family cult that they are trying to maintain. And that does not allow you to develop your own sense of self. I'm adding this to the ACE factors because, especially amongst us energetically sensitives and empaths, this number is growing rapidly. People who are realizing that they have been raised by parents where it was all about them and their needs, and where you weren't allowed to express your needs, to even voice them, to even have needs, and where you were basically conditioned to please your parents, to please the image or the false self, or the family spirit, if you will, the family legacy as your priority, because this can lead to severe other aspects that will attract all these factors, these other 10 factors that we just talked about. I hope this illuminates a bit more why so many of us are on this, sliding scale here between really strong inner child wounds, difficulties dealing with reality, and really strong empathy that seems to make it even worse because we keep absorbing other people's energies. Thank you for listening. I hope you liked it. Please share this video and push the like button. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.